This summer, most of us could use more energy, but we have to find ways to replenish our bodies in healthy ways. It turns out two main factors in low energy are chronic stress and a lack of nutrition. Organifi creates delicious, refreshing superfood blends that also address both of these problems. This summer, try Organifi green juice with essential superfoods and a clinical dose of ashwagandha. It helps reduce stress and support healthy cortisol levels. Or my favorite, Organifi red juice, a superfood punch that increases energy without the caffeine and only 2 grams of sugar. Each Organifi blend is easy to use by simply mixing it with water or your favorite beverage while on the go, and they don't compromise quality for taste. You can experience Organifi's high-quality superfoods without breaking the bank. Head over to www.organifi.com/bestofyou and use code bestofyou for 20% off your entire order. That's www.organifi.com/bestofyou and use code bestofyou. Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Allison, and I'm so glad you're here to discover what brings out the best of you. This podcast is all about breaking free from painful patterns, mending the past, and discovering our true selves in God. I can't wait to get started as we learn together how to become the best version of who we are with God's help. Hey everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Best of You podcast. I'm so glad you're here today, and I'm just thrilled to bring you this conversation all about naming, framing, and braving depression. This is such an important topic. As you'll hear from my guest in today's episode, depression has increased in numbers over the past decade, and it's really prevalent, especially among women. And my guest today is just so helpful and so practical and so hopeful in helping us to name depression in our lives, frame it, and then take brave steps toward finding more joy and more health and more wholeness in our lives. My guest today, Dr. Len Lantz, is one of America's top psychiatrists and a clinical assistant professor in psychiatry at the University of Washington School of Medicine. He is the editor of the Psychiatry Resource, and he maintains a clinical practice at Big Sky Psychiatry in Helena, Montana. And I actually met Len way back in the day when we were both undergraduates at Dartmouth College. Len and I lost touch after college, but reconnected when he got his hands on a copy of my first book with Kimberly Miller, Boundaries for Your Soul. And he realized as he was reading it that he knew me, that we had gone to college together. We reconnected and I learned about his work treating depression and his book called Unjoy, Hope and Help for 7 million Christians with depression. It's a fantastic resource for anyone who struggles with depression, or if you know someone, a loved one, a family member, a neighbor who struggles with depression. Len brings together the best in science and psychiatry and current research on depression with a faith-based perspective. This book is such a helpful resource, and I'm so thrilled to bring you this conversation today with Dr. Len Lantz. So the last time I think we saw each other, I think, Len, we lived in the same cluster of dorms at Dartmouth. Weren't you in the Choates?
I want to say I was in the Choates for maybe a year, and then I was in the International House for like my junior and senior year.
How did you end up in the International House?
Well, my freshman roommate, Indy, is from India, and he loved the International House, and you're allowed to be in the International House if you're from the U.S., and I felt a lot like an international student being on the East Coast because I'm from South Dakota, and I think that it just felt like a big cultural shift for me to be on the East Coast and to be at a place like Dartmouth. And so I really connected well with the international students. We all felt like we were in the same boat. I was actually their RA for a year.
That's amazing. So this is what I kind of remember about you, because I was from Wyoming, born and raised in Wyoming, and it absolutely felt like going to a different country. And maybe even more so back then. I don't know, because it's not like there was the internet. We really were in a different world. I remember like very quickly feeling like I was a fish out of my own water.
Absolutely.
Did you end up feeling like in hindsight you had a good experience at Dartmouth overall?
So the things that were very meaningful for me at Dartmouth was connecting with other Christians.
Yeah.
And it was transformative in my spiritual life. I went from, this is what I want to do, God, please bless it, please make it happen, to moving into my own faith. Not the faith of my parents, but my own faith, where I'm asking God, what do you want from me? What do you want me to do? As opposed to, this is what I want to do, please bless it. And so there was that. And then I was still dating my high school sweetheart, whom I married, Krista. And so she was going to college about 4 hours away at Bard in New York. And so I was gone for a lot of the weekends, or she was there. And so that kind of changed my experience a little bit, because we had that relationship that we were trying to nurture.
Yeah.
And then I changed my major because I felt that God was calling me into medicine, which it's a story in and of itself, but it was a huge leap of faith for me to change majors and then to plan to go into medicine. And that changed everything for me academically, because I had to shift majors and classes. And I mean, Dartmouth was hard.
Yeah, it was.
It was harder for me than medical school.
Wow.
So I am very grateful for it. And it was a challenging part of my life.
That makes sense. It's so interesting listening to you, because you and I both coming from, I'm going to guess, Wyoming and South Dakota were neighbors, more culturally Christian, in that sense of definitely more people identify as Christian. And I had the same experience where my faith came alive at Dartmouth. And it's fascinating because, people think, oh, if you go off to these secular Ivy League schools, you're going to lose your faith. And you and I had the opposite experience. There was a really vital Christian presence at Dartmouth. It was very formative for me spiritually as well.
Absolutely. I mean, a place where you are exploring it for you. You're not just doing it with your family.
And not because there's some cultural norm behind it either. It's, you really have to think about, that's one of the things, we landed in Boston, my husband and I, these last 20 years. And I'll say to people, gosh, the Christians you meet here are amazing, because you're not going to be a Christian really in the Northeast because it's culturally what the norm is. You're going to have put some thought into it on some level.
Absolutely. And you're going to have to seek out Christian communities.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to get into a little bit. So you didn't get into college thinking I'm going in to be a doctor. That changed in college. You felt called to go into medical school. Did you know at that point you were going to go into psychiatry?
Oh, no, not at all. In fact, I thought I was going to go into family practice. And that's because one of the former U.S. Surgeon Generals, C. Everett Koop, was at Dartmouth, and he did a lot of talking about family practice and the importance of medicine and primary care. And I thought, when I was thinking about medicine, I was like, okay, I'm going to be a family practice doctor. And then when I got into medical school, we had this opportunity to experience a lot of different medical specialties. I would say most. And so I was thinking about family practice, but I loved surgery and I loved pediatrics, or thought I was going to love pediatrics, but then I got into it and I realized that a lot of, at least on the outpatient side of pediatrics, a lot of it is treating kids who are age 2 and younger. So they can't communicate really well. And it's usually well-child visits. So you're pinning these little kids down and they're really upset. And you're looking in their ears and looking in their mouth and their eyes. And I felt like a bully. I'm pinning down these kids who can't talk to me. But what I loved was when the teenagers would come in, and they were usually only coming in for sports physicals or whatever. And they were kind of anxious and aloof and maybe a little irritable. And what I really loved was breaking the ice, kind of getting past their armor a bit.
Yeah.
And then they would just open up and talk and talk and talk. They wouldn't want to stop talking. And I thought, this is awesome. What if I could do this all the time? And then I thought more about psychiatry and child psychiatry. And the more I looked into it, the more I realized how much of a need there is, how much there is a national shortage for psychiatry, and in particular, child psychiatry or pediatric psychiatry. And so when I realized the need, that spoke to my heart. Like that just like punched me in the gut where I like, wow, I'm not going to just be yet another doctor in a city or community or state or whatever. I can make a big impact.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's what really drew me to psychiatry. And I see a ton of kids still, and I see a lot of adults, but it's been a great experience. And then I think the other thing that I really like about psychiatry is that it is challenging. It's hard to do well. And so, every day is different, and every person is different, and everybody's story is different. And I find that so valuable that it's easy for me to go to work and actually hear about people's story. And it's not hard on me per se. I think God designed me to be able to hear the hard stories.
Yeah, that's amazing, Len. I think about it with psychiatry. It's not like there's a lab or a blood test you can take to get a diagnosis for depression or anxiety necessarily. I mean, you correct me, there's probably some maybe
Not
brain
yet.
scanning. Yeah, right? And so it really is, you're having to listen really, really hard and really, really well to people's self-report, which is notoriously kind of murky. It's hard for us to know how to communicate what we're feeling, and you have to kind of sift through all that. So you have to have some serious skills at listening and discerning and kind of trying to think through what you're hearing and how it matches up against a potential need for a diagnosis or a medication.
Yeah, I kind of think of myself a bit as a detective. I want to get to know this person really well, and I want them to trust me. I believe I'm trustworthy, but I want them to trust me so they can share the hard stuff.
Yeah.
And then listen really carefully and then be thorough and come back to things again and again to make sure that I'm not missing something. Because in medicine and in psychiatry, in terms of like diagnoses or whatever, it's important to be able to diagnose like, what do you have? But it's also important to be thorough to say, well, what do you not have? But I enjoy that. I mean, I find it very energizing.
That's incredible. I know some psychiatrists do some talk therapy in addition to prescribing. Do you have a component of that in your practice?
I would say I incorporate it. I'm actually trained in a lot of different psychotherapy modalities, and I've done a lot of psychotherapy and family therapy, and I really love it. I mean, I love it a lot. And so I incorporate a lot of different therapeutic modalities, whether it's interpersonal psychotherapy or cognitive behavioral therapy and some acceptance and commitment therapy. However, unfortunately, the need right now is so great that I'm trying to balance out spending enough time with people so they can get really quality care. And I do infuse psychotherapy in that. But for the most part, where I'm helping people right now is in helping them to get an accurate diagnosis. And then if they need meds, I'll handle the meds. And then I coordinate with a lot of exceptional therapists. Like in terms of pediatric psychiatrists who are available in my city, of about 35,000 people, there's maybe one or two pediatric psychiatrists, and there's about 200 therapists. And so that's why I'm just trying to balance that out. But I love therapy. It is so powerful. It is so effective. And it's not something you have to do forever.
Do the men in your life always complain about the nicks, cuts, and irritation from cheap razors? Well, you've got to meet Henson Shaving. Henson Shaving is a family-owned aerospace parts manufacturer that is bringing precision engineering to men's shaving experience. 88% of men experience irritation from shaving, yet Henson users have seen dramatic improvements, including the disappearance of ingrown hairs and razor bumps. Henson's aerospace background has enabled the creation of razors with unmatched precision. The Henson razor works with standard dual-edged blades to give your guy that old-school shave with the benefits of new-school tech. Once he owns a Henson razor, it's only about $3 to $5 a year to replace the blades. It's time to say no to subscriptions and yes to a razor that'll last you a lifetime. Visit hensonshaving.com/bestofyou to pick the razor for you and use code bestofyou to get 2 years worth of blades free with your razor. Just make sure to add them to your cart. That's 100 free blades when you head to HENSONSHAVING.com/bestofyou and use code bestofyou. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. It's hard to believe we're already into summer. When life goes by so fast, it's important to take a moment to pause and check in. What do you want to celebrate so far from the year? And what are some adjustments you might want to make for the rest of the year? Therapy can help you take stock of your progress and set achievable goals for the next 6 months. You might want to think about your family, your friendships, your personal goals. Where do you feel like you're making progress, and where do you feel like you might be able to use some help? If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. This summer, take a moment. Visit betterhelp.com/bestofyou today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/bestofyou. I'm curious, two things. One, I'd love for you to, if you're comfortable, give us a little lay of the land of what's going on. We keep hearing some of these headlines about mental health crisis, anxiety and depression is up. I'm curious what you think about that, if you're willing to answer that. And then number two, I'm curious, just before we dive into the topic of depression, what nuggets of wisdom or advice would you give to the listener who is really desperate for a clear diagnosis or trying to figure out how to find someone to help them on that, not just therapeutically, but get to the root of what's going on so that they can get the right care that they need?
These are good questions. Let's start with the first part, which is how common is depression right now? And if we just looked at adults, it's concerning because the most recent data from a Gallup poll showed that around 29% of U.S. adults have experienced depression in their lifetime. This is self-report that they were told by someone that they had major depression. That's a lot. And it's an average. So it's an average of adults across ages and between men and women. So then if you break down the data further, over a third of women have received a diagnosis of depression in their lifetime. And for men, it's like a fifth. It's like 20%. But, guys, they kind of avoid doctors like the plague. So how are they going to get diagnosed if they don't never see anybody, right? So the concern is that the rates are high. Now, it's not everybody, obviously, but the rates, to me, that seems high. And what they would argue is that's about a 10-point increase over maybe the last decade. So rates have gone up. And, life is harder, I really think, over the last decade. So maybe that's part of it. Pandemic was not easy on anybody. But what I would say is that depression is real and it can cause tremendous impact in your life. And so then if you think you have it, how do you get it diagnosed? And then where do you go from there? So one would be just distinguishing, what is depression? I think it's worthwhile just to take a second and talk about, what are some of the symptoms or signs of depression? So some of the symptoms or signs of depression would be significant sadness. Sadness that is lasting half a day or a whole day and happening maybe half the days of the week or more. And not just in reaction to something. It's like you wake up that way or it just hits you randomly. And you don't have to have all these symptoms, but maybe a cluster of these symptoms. Your motivation and energy are just low. You are dragging. Your mind might not be working as well, like concentration problems. You might be feeling a bit hopeless or helpless or worthless. Your appetite, your sleep may be off. You might be crying all the time. Maybe even have some thoughts of wanting to die or like a death wish that's kind of like, oh, God, take me now, or if I just went to sleep and didn't wake up, it wouldn't bother me. Or even like, well, if I had a terminal illness, I wouldn't be on this earth much longer. So kind of like sometimes these passive thoughts, or maybe that it's even more intense than that. And then this other symptom, and it's not always there, but it's there the most commonly among all the others, besides sadness, which is anhedonia. And anhedonia is this fancy old word for saying, loss of joy in life. And it's why I titled my book that way. I was trying to find a better word for it, so I just did a made-up word called unjoy.
Yeah.
But I think unjoy captures this loss of joy that happens where fun things aren't fun anymore. And so if all of these symptoms or a cluster of these symptoms are happening for a couple weeks or more, it's usually considered depression, okay? And why it's so important to know if you have it is that you should do something effective about it. There are other things, in life that might mimic depression. We could talk about that. But I think there's this other element that I try and do as a doc, which is to make sure that I'm looking for other conditions. Like, is a person depressed or they have such intense anxiety? It's as though they have depression. Is their life so hard or miserable right now that maybe they have burnout, Or maybe the depression just hits occasionally, but it hits like a ton of bricks. And other times your mood is normal or actually elevated. Some people have bipolar disorder, but they only really come in when they're depressed. And when they're depressed, they don't even necessarily remember the highs. The depression hits so hard and is so severe, they don't even really remember the highs. And so it is important to get to the bottom of things like, what kind of diagnosis do I have? Because the treatments vary. Sometimes it's you have a stellar primary care provider, whether that's a medical doctor or like a nurse practitioner or PA. But some people have a very stellar primary care provider, and sometimes their primary care provider is not stellar in terms of mental health. There are some free rating scales that are out there just in terms of screeners, depression screeners. There's even some bipolar depression or bipolar screeners that are out there, but that's a place to start. And it is a challenge. I have a private practice, so I can decide how much time I want to spend with patients, and I spend a lot more than the average person. So I've kind of made this decision in my private practice that I've made the decision to focus on quality over quantity. And so I kind of have a bit of a wait list, but once you're in, you're in. And then we'll take the time that we need. So I can only help who I can help. But it's once you're in, we will take the time that's necessary to get to the bottom of things.
That's so good, Len. That's so good. I love how you're just differentiating. You really have to think about what's really at the root, because that, I'm sure, affects what medication you use, or even holistically, what other interventions you might use. It might affect how long somebody is on medication, right? It might be just a stopgap, or it might be something that is needed for much longer. Tell me, in your experience, because your book, Unjoy, the subtitle is Hope and Help for 7 Million Christians with Depression. What are some of the stigmas that your patients who come from a Christian background, who come from a faith background, face when it comes to a diagnosis of depression or dealing with depression?
Well, there's a variety of things. And I think a lot of it stems from the Christian community that they're in, the church that they're in, their friend and family support network in terms of how accepting people are of mental health. So one comes from your community and whether or not you would feel comfortable sharing something like that. It's interesting, because no matter how much stigma there might be in your Christian community about mental health, for other medical conditions, it's kind of no big deal. If you had diabetes, they're not well, where's the sin in your life? You have diabetes. People don't talk that way, usually. Or you have asthma. Where's your undisclosed sin? You have asthma. Nobody talks that way. And so people are fine sharing about a lot of medical conditions. Okay. And so when it comes to stigma with mental health, I think it starts with our community. So one stigma, people are afraid to talk about it. Mm-hmm. And then another, I would say, in some communities, they treat mental health conditions as almost made up or like a weakness. And so that can be another kind of source of people not reaching out for help if that's kind of the message that they're getting. Sometimes there can be a fear of secular resources or helpers. Sometimes doctors or therapists or other professionals are kind of looked at or treated with suspicion. And then there's this other thing that I would say a lot of people feel, not just Christians, but sometimes there's this fear that if you acknowledge that you have depression, it's almost like there's this fear that you're acknowledging that somehow you have some deep flaw. And you don't. I mean, I don't see depression as different than asthma or diabetes or other really big medical conditions. I really see depression as an illness of the brain that can get better. I mean, I think some of the major messages that need to get out there is that depression is real and it's treatable.
I love that. And you say that pretty strongly in the book, from mild all the way to severe depression. You really believe people can get better. And I really want the listener to hear that, because I agree with you. I think one of the reasons, apart from faith, apart from all the stigmas, one of the reasons we are afraid to name it, to really get honest about, oh, this is something I'm struggling with, is because then we're afraid that then we're just stuck with it, sort of. When in fact, naming it might be the next step toward really finding freedom. And so I want to talk about that a little bit, Len. I mean, we're going to link to the book, such a helpful, practical resource. I want to give the listener a glimpse into the kinds of things that might be helpful. You talk about mild depression. Let's start there. How prevalent is it? And how do you, as you look at someone who you think is experiencing mild depression, how do you look at the different ways of treating it?
So oftentimes people, when they have mild depression, they haven't even reached out to a professional resource at that point. They're kind of trying to sort things out on their own. They might be going through this process of discernment, kind of like, what is going on? You know, what can I do just on my own to start getting things back on track? One of the things I mentioned in the book that I think we should talk about today is one of the most powerful natural treatments for depression, and it's called behavioral activation. The research would show it's far more powerful even than antidepressants. Now, obviously, if behavioral activation alone isn't working, maybe you should get on an antidepressant. But behavioral activation is this concept that you kind of put yourself on your schedule for the day. It's about filling your day with activities that are in alignment with your values. And so when we talk about behavioral activation, it's about every 30 minutes to every 60 minutes, kind of do something different. So wake up and do your hygiene and put on clean clothes and leave the house or the apartment and just get outside. Go for a walk, meet someone for coffee, come back. All right, not everything's fun. Open your mail and then, maybe listen to some music and play some music and then do your laundry. And then maybe you're going to read next. But even if you're not at work, what activities are you filling your day with that are in alignment with your values? So if that includes reading your Bible, read your Bible. If that includes praying, pray, okay? I mean, you can do pleasurable things. Just don't have that be your whole day. Like ice cream and pajamas and binge watching Netflix all day on your couch, not recommended. Okay, I know a lot of people like to kind of treat themselves that way, or like, oh, I have the day off, so I'm going to spend it the whole day in bed. That's actually not good for you, okay? If you get a mental health day from work, if you take a day off from work, you're like, I just can't do it. I'm calling off from work. How are you going to spend that day in a meaningful way? And that is incredibly powerful. And it's hard. If you're depressed, you don't want to do anything. You don't have energy. You don't have motivation. You're going to have to gut it out. But let me tell you something. If you do that, if you fill your day with activities that are in alignment with your values, 1, it might actually help your mood throughout the day. 2, even if it didn't help your mood, you will have the sense of satisfaction at the end of the day. Look what I did.
Okay, so again, this is mild depression, right? Because I want to tease something out here. So this is someone who, for whatever reason, can't get out of, they're still functional, but has this anhedonia, this unjoy, this I'm going through the motions of my life. And the temptation when you feel that way is to kind of just shut down and sink into it, is I'm imagining. The temptation is just to stay in bed all day. I don't feel like doing anything. Nothing's bringing me joy. So I'll just stop doing everything. And what I think I'm hearing you say, according to the research, this behavioral activation, it's almost a counter move. Work against that feeling by almost hyperstructuring your day, really making sure every hour you are doing something. You're sort of working against the feeling. And you're saying that those actions might begin to change your brain, release the good chemicals, improve the mood. But at the very least, they create that sense of satisfaction. It's almost like a sick day where you don't feel well, but instead of like a cold, maybe you should go to bed for the day. With depression, it's almost the opposite. It's keep going mindfully. And I want to pause here because I could imagine a listener saying, but I did that and I don't feel better. And then they shame themselves or then they're mad. But you're saying very clearly, you're doing this mindfully and intentionally. It may not immediately boost your mood. You're not trying to trick yourself. There's something about the keeping those behaviors going that activates something helpful and healthy, both in your brain and just in your psyche, in your overall sense of satisfaction in yourself.
You're absolutely correct. In fact, doing these activities, even if they don't work for just that day, over time do work because they light up the non-depressed portions of your brain. And when you are doing behavioral activation, hopefully you're doing other things that have been proven to help depression, like exercise. Exercise is huge in terms of helping depression and anxiety. And a lot of people say, doesn't help me. And I'll say, hang on just a second. It's very clear that some people with exercise, there's a portion where they feel better in the middle of exercise. Some don't see really any difference in the middle of exercise, and some feel worse in the middle of exercise. But at the end of exercise, when it's over, the vast majority of people have a greater sense of wellness. They feel better and they feel less depressed.
Yeah.
And so there is this aspect to not judge yourself and to not give up. Because the challenge with depression is it's a big old liar. You know, it tells you that you're worthless when you have worth. It tells you that you should avoid people because maybe you're more irritable and you don't want to be snapping at people, or you feel like people don't like you. And so, the other aspects of behavioral activation is connect with others. Isolation and loneliness just feed depression. And so the idea is that depression, if it's pulling us into all these unhealthy habits, we need to push against those unhealthy habits to get back on track.
Yeah. And again, this is the science. This is the research. We know that this changes the brain. And again, even when you said read the Bible, pray, you may not feel magically. I want to really push against. It's not that suddenly you'll feel like God has cured you. It's that you're doing those things because you value those things. It's almost the prescription. The prescription when you have a mild case of depression is to really keep doing those activities that mean the most to you and that are proven to be good for your mental health. That's the 2 aspirin that you need to take in that
That's
sense.
Right.
It's great. There are some stories about my dad's life that I truly never get tired of hearing. From hilarious to heartfelt, tear-jerking to plot twisting, his retelling of the events always brings me joy. Just in time for Father's Day, I found the perfect gift that captures all his stories for my family forever. It's called Storyworth. Storyworth helps you preserve precious memories and stories from your dad for years to come. Each week, Storyworth emails your loved one a thought-provoking question that you get to help pick. You might ask about regrets or old holiday traditions. And Storyworth makes the writing process a breeze. All your loved one needs to do is respond to that email with a story. Long or short, it doesn't matter. You'll receive an email copy of your loved one's responses, and then after a year, Storyworth compiles all those stories into a beautiful keepsake hardcover book that you'll be able to share and revisit for generations to come. Give all the fathers in your life a unique, heartfelt gift you'll all cherish for years. Storyworth. Right now, save $10 on your first purchase when you go to storyworth.com/bestofyou. That's storyworth.com/bestofyou to save $10 on your first purchase. I love that I can get my favorite Purely Elizabeth granola auto-shipped to my front door every month, along with my favorite 7th generation paper products. Thrive Market only allows trusted, top-quality ingredients while restricting over 1,000 harmful ingredients like artificial flavors, high-fructose corn syrup, and more. Whether you're looking for organic kid snacks, low-sugar alternatives, or high-protein essentials, you can curate your own shopping experience with just a few clicks and trust that you're getting quality products so you can shop worry-free. When you join Thrive Market, you are also helping a family in need with their 1-for-1 membership matching program. You join, they give. Save time and money and shop Thrive Market today. Go to thrivemarket.com/bestofyou for 30% off your first order plus a free $60 gift. That's THRIVE market.com/bestofyou. thrivemarket.com/bestofyou. Okay, so let's move into, Len, when you start to see more, you call it stubborn or severe depression. Tell me, what's the difference? How do we differentiate that? How do you know you've got a more stubborn type of depression? And how do you like to approach that?
I would start by saying there are different intensities of depression. I mean, you could see this on depression rating scales where someone's numbers kind of look like they're in the mild range or the medium range or the severe range. And then when you talk with people and you're saying, well, just ballpark it for me. How bad do you feel like this depression is? Does it feel like a small amount, medium amount, or large amount? Those usually line up really well with the numbers. And when they don't, it gives me an opportunity to say, oh, let's explore this and find out what I'm missing here. And so if you're dealing with moderate to severe depression, or if you're dealing with suicidal thoughts, you want to be working with a professional. You want to be working with someone who really knows what they're doing, who knows how to help you learn the skills for staying safe. You know, the interesting thing, just to digress for a second, the interesting thing about suicidal thoughts that a lot of people don't know is that you can actually do something helpful about them. A lot of people just feel like, well, if I'm feeling suicidal, I just need to hang on by my fingernails, just hang on until that wave passes. And there are actually many strategies that you can use to enhance your safety while you're feeling this that are unique to you, that you choose to help improve safety if you're having thoughts of suicide. And so working with someone who knows that and knows how to coach you around that and who knows how to help you practice those skills so that you're not feeling at the mercy of suicidal thoughts. So that's another thing I guess I would say. But for people with, severe depression or suicidality, or for people who've had depression that's lasted years, sometimes decades, or they keep having these episodes of depression. I had it for whatever, a few months or a year, got rid of it, and it came back. That can be really challenging to treat, and yet it's still treatable. And I think that is definitely the time when you want to be searching out, and it might take time to get through someone's waiting list. It might take phone calls. You might have to run through a few therapists or psychiatrists before you actually find somebody who clicks and who really gets you and is going to be able to get you out of the depression. But medicines can make a big difference. Antidepressants and other medicines that are kind of used to enhance the effect of antidepressants. Psychotherapy is incredibly important for learning skills, for not just managing mood, but helping you to manage your behavior around your depression and staying safe. And then there are some interventional treatments that are out there. And, sometimes if you think about a medical intervention, it might sound a little scary because it sounds kind of intense. The one that has probably the most stigma is one called electroconvulsive therapy, or ECT. And that's one that has just kind of gotten highly stigmatized. But it's one where the treatment creates a seizure, and that over time alleviates depression. It can have some side effects, but it saves lives. But there are other treatments where they don't involve seizures and don't involve a whole day, but might involve an hour or a few hours during the day. One's called transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS. And I was providing TMS in my practice for about 4.5 years, and it's tremendously helpful. I had trouble keeping it going because of the pandemic, but we're going to be getting it back in Helena this year. There's ketamine, which is a newer treatment for depression, and it helps suicidality. And then there's yet more research coming forward. They're looking at this compound found in nature called psilocybin, which also may help with depression. And so there's something new out there.
Yeah.
And I want people to not give up. Like if the standard treatments haven't worked, or if you tried one or two things, it might feel like you tried everything. But if you're working with a professional who's really skilled in what they do, they'll be able to help you see, I think you haven't tried everything. Or I think there's something different that we can try to help you.
And Len, do you go through some of the nuances of some of these different interventions in the book in Unjoy?
Yes, I do.
Good. So folks are interested in learning more. I mean, you've got years of experience with this. You've treated, I would imagine, thousands of people. And so I love what you're saying, though. There's just new advances every single day. One of the things I think that's hard is if you are experiencing depression and you don't have a professional, it can be hard to have the gumption to really, like you said, have to go through and meet with different therapists and find someone and even work with your health insurance to figure it out. I would add to maybe that's where you could ask a friend to help or ask a family member to help you if you're struggling to have that gumption to find the person to walk with you, that's something you could ask for help from a church community or from a neighbor or from a friend. And again, without that stigma, right? If we went to our neighbor and said, I'm dealing with diabetes, could you help me find a doctor? Most people would say, sure. So to kind of remind yourself to normalize, I'm dealing with depression. Would you be willing to help me for the next few weeks do the work? Because I'm struggling to find the gumption to get to that person who can be with me regularly through this.
Absolutely. And I think for the listeners that you have on today, if they don't have depression, they probably know somebody who does. And so they could consider whether they could be that encourager and that helper. One of the chapters is on how do you help a friend or a family member who has depression. And I love this quote. One of my colleagues, a fellow doctor, had this quote. She was trying to kind of, as a doctor, distill down, or a psychiatrist distill down, what is it that we really do? She said, we are the keepers of hope for those who have lost theirs. And so if you have depression, you need somebody who has your back and who will support you. And if you don't have depression, you might know somebody who does, and you can be the keeper of hope for them until they get theirs back.
I love that. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you so much for taking the time to walk us through some of this today. And again, just having the conversation, normalizing it, naming it. We'll link to a lot of the resources that we discussed in the show notes for folks. I want to ask you, Len, just as we close, 2 questions I like to ask my guests. Number 1, what would you, the Len who you are now, what would you say to that young college student getting ready to make this shift in your major to become a doctor? What words of wisdom or words of encouragement would you say to that younger you from what you know now?
That's a good question. I think I would encourage myself to take the risk. I'm glad I took a leap of faith. And I think the other thing is I think everybody deals with feelings of insecurity. And so I just say, you're good enough.
That's beautiful. And what's bringing out the best of you right now, Len?
I was thinking about this last night because I got that question from you, and I want to be careful because I feel like these are things I aspire to and I'm trying to get good at, but it's not necessarily like I'm awesome, okay? One of the things is I'm trying to make an active effort not to throw my life out of balance, because what I'll do is I'll get to projects and then everything else goes out of balance in my life. So I've been trying to live my life more in balance, and I would say that was one of the biggest things. And one of the little habits that I've developed is after I do morning devotions, I've been walking every morning before work. And I do other things like my wife, Krista, and I, we do some yoga exercises together every morning, and that helps us to connect as a couple, doing an activity together every morning. But after I do my morning devotions, I go for a walk. And as I walk, I listen to audiobooks because it's an easy way to read if you can hear it. And it's just been lighting up my mind every morning with new ideas. And I would say that's been so awesome because there's books that I can listen to as an audiobook that I'd have a very hard time just even opening the cover, some nonfiction thing on some topic that looks dry. And I can hear it and I can still hear the ideas. And it really is a wonderful way to light up my brain every morning after devotions.
I love that. I love how you say that, light up your brain, because even for those of us just facing the normal challenges of life, those practices do literally, I know for me, if I've had a really hard day or I'm irritable or frustrated, music, I can feel it changing my brain. It just puts me in a different part of my brain. And I hear that in what you're saying with that morning walk. That's beautiful. Thank you so much. What's the best way for people to connect with you and to find your work, especially your book, Unjoy?
So the book is available on Amazon, and you can order it through your local Christian bookstore as well. And so it's, most places where they sell books, you can access it. I have written on a lot of other topics related to depression, anxiety. I've written a lot on parenting, actually, and that's at my website, psychiatryresource.com. And so people can find my work there. People can actually message me there, but it's partly why I'm not on social media is I can't really offer medical advice to people if they're not actually patients, but I do respond to emails, people who contact me.
I'll be sure to link to all that in the show notes, and I really appreciate your time.
This has been such a pleasure. I'm so thankful that you invited me here, and it's so nice to just reconnect again. This has been such a treat for me today.
There's a lot of synergy between what we're doing through this work of faith-based mental health. So thank you, Len. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of The Best of You. It would mean so much if you take a moment to subscribe. You can go to Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you listen to podcasts and click the plus or follow button. That will ensure you don't miss an episode and it helps get the word out to others. While you're there, I'd love it if you leave your 5-star review. I look forward to seeing you back here next Thursday. And remember, as you become the best of who you are, you honor God, you heal others, and you stay true to your God-given self.